A daydreaming asthmatic high school student teams up with his hero for a martial arts tournament. Listen as we chat about facts that are clearly satire, the time Alan kinda, but not really, met Danica McKellar, and the stupidest bully nickname ever. Then we see if Sidekicks stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Test of Time. I'm James Brief, and joining me, as always, is my sidekick. You knew I was going to do it, Al.
I did.
My sidekick, Alan Noah.
You know, sometimes the obvious joke is the right joke. If I had started the episode, I would have said the exact same thing, so it works. How you doing, James?
I'm doing very well. I was looking forward to watching this film because this is the kind of film that I hadn't seen in over several decades.
Okay.
I'd seen this shortly after it came out because I was somewhat intrigued by the premise of the movie. You had never seen it, right?
No, the first Chuck Norris movie I ever watched was Invasion USA for this podcast, and this was my second Chuck Norris movie that I had ever seen.
Well, I will tell you that there are 3 more Chuck Norris movies that I ever want to watch with you.
Oh, dear God.
Not counting Bruce Lee films, in which he is famously the villain in some of those. But I do want to watch the first 2 missing in action films.
Okay.
I also want to watch The Delta Force.
Okay.
Those 2 movies are referenced in Sidekicks, as well as another Chuck Norris film I'd never seen called The Hitman.
Right.
You know, let's talk a little bit about Chuck Norris. He recently passed away. That's why we are doing Sidekicks today.
Right.
He is a champion martial artist. He was handpicked by Bruce Lee to be the person that would do his movies with him because, you know, they weren't doing special effects or anything. And he needed someone that could keep up with him.
Yeah, he was a legitimate martial artist. You don't see him do much martial arts in this movie, Sidekicks.
No. That being said, since we are reviewing this shortly after Chuck Norris died in 2026, Chuck Norris in 1992 in this film, 93 when this film came out, his best years of being an action celebrity were behind him. You know, he would be best known after this as a meme. Well, that's not necessarily true because Walker, Texas Ranger would be after this.
Right.
But that's more of like his legacy show that you get to do when people love you for 50 years.
Well, I just found this out this morning while I was doing some research for this movie that Chuck Norris sued the people who were doing the memes, and that's shitty. Like, I kind of feel like, have a sense of humor about yourself, man. There was a book that compiled a lot of these quote-unquote Chuck Norris facts, and so he was kind of pushing back on the word facts, which is fair, because if you don't get the joke, you could be misled. And apparently some of the jokes in that book were racist, and he didn't like that. And, you know, it was associated with his name. And I could sort of see that. Also, though, Chuck Norris himself was pretty fucking racist. And so for him to say, hey, you can't make racist jokes about me, but I can go and say racist shit about Obama, you know, that's pretty fucking hypocritical.
I mean, I think facts is very easy to disprove. I mean, Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. The earth moves up and down when he moves his arms. I think you can get a jury to believe that is satire.
Right.
Making money off of that is where I could see where a lawyer could say, this is not fair use. I also think you could legitimately maybe convince a jury that Chuck Norris is kind of in on it. because I've seen him do Chuck Norris jokes. I think in the Expendables they make the one where he's in. I think they make Chuck Norris jokes.
Okay.
But making actual money, you can't do that.
I get that. They were making money off of his name. Legally, he probably did have grounds to sue. But when people are celebrating your tough guy image and your response is to sue them just on that one-liner, it looks bad. Whatever. But let's get into Sidekicks. For anyone who hasn't seen this movie, it's about Barry Grabowski, a shy, asthmatic teenager who escapes his difficult school life by daydreaming that he's the heroic sidekick to his idol, martial arts champion and movie star Chuck Norris. In these fantasies, Barry is confident, strong, and capable, everything he feels he's not in real life. At school, Barry is bullied and struggles to fit in, but things begin to shift when his teacher encourages him to learn about karate from her uncle, Mr. Lee. As Barry trains, he slowly gains confidence and discipline. Barry eventually enters a karate tournament where he faces his bully in a final match. Ultimately, Barry wins, and Chuck proves that he's a better fighter than Joe Piscopo. So when this movie came out, how did it do at the box office, James?
Yeah, it's weird. I have a couple different release dates, if it's 92 or 1993.
Okay.
But I do have that on April 30th, 1993, it came out and it came in number 2 with $3.7 million to Indecent Proposals, $7 million. I have it having different budgets, anywhere from $8 to $10 million. It wound up earning $17 million domestically. We've talked about it before, Jonathan Brandis, just quickly. He was in a lot of movies in the 90s, and he just unfortunately didn't really have that big a successful career. He had a comeback part in a Bruce Willis film that unfortunately got cut, and I think it was like unknown to him that it was cut, maybe at the premiere or something.
Heart's War, right?
Heart's War. He auditioned for Anakin Skywalker, and he kind of, looking at Hayden Christensen, I could totally see him getting that part.
Sure.
I don't know what else was involved in his life, if he had any other mental illness, but he did hang himself, and his friends caught him, but he didn't make it. And I always thought that, in a weird way, Jonathan Brandis would kind of get back into it, because he did some indie movies. We saw him in that movie, The Outside Providence, remember?
Right.
He should be on a talk show right now talking about those dark years, and then he got that one indie, like a Brendan Fraser kind of thing. I kind of feel like he was going to come back. It's such a shame.
Horrible tragedy. It's the cliche thing people say about suicide, that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I think there's a trap of sometimes people misattributing an actor's career struggles with the reason that they take their own life. Maybe that was a part of it, maybe it wasn't, or maybe it was a huge part, maybe it was a small part. It's impossible to know. He didn't leave a suicide note, but clearly there were underlying mental health issues there, and just a terrible, terrible tragedy. Moving away from Jonathan Brandis to his character in this movie, Barry, he is portrayed in the movie as a daydreamer. He's a little spacey. He's just kind of out there or different. Like, that's of the time. Watching the movie now in 2026, where we do understand more about neurodivergence and mental illness and things like that, I was wondering, does Barry, not Jonathan Brandis in real life, but does Barry have some serious condition where he is just constantly having these really, really vivid fantasies that maybe it's not just a silly little thing where the teacher needs to kind of wag her finger at him and say, you need to get your head out of the clouds, mister. And maybe he needs some serious, real psychological help?
100% no, in my opinion.
No?
I think
Okay.
this kid is absolutely a normal kid, that when he's at recess, he's not just imagining he's at recess, he's imagining he's running and he's Luke Skywalker.
This kid's in high school. Isn't he a little too old to be doing that?
Absolutely not. I took fencing my freshman year, and if you think that any one of us, when we got into the fencing gear, we didn't think we were, maybe it's Inigo Montoya, maybe it's Luke Skywalker. We were absolutely thinking that we were playing with like swords and we're knights or we're whatever.
But that's different from like having an intense fantasy in the middle of class and then waking up and screaming, I'll do anything for you, Chuck. If he's in the gym and he's punching a punching bag and he's imagining fighting Chuck Norris or fighting alongside Chuck Norris, sure, this feels different than that.
I will give you that. I'm sticking 100% that this is a kid that has daydreams like any other kid. I honestly chalk it up to it's a mistake of the film that they include those parts.
What parts? The daydreams?
No, the daydreams are like the most important parts of the film. I think the parts where it transitions him actually speaking that in the real world.
Okay. I realize now that I've asked you this question, you, a daydreamer. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
You know, one thing I am going to say I didn't like at first, and I don't like that 80s movies do this. It depicts asthma as a really kind of a weak thing, and the Goonies is guilty of this too.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also something that you can kind of like will yourself out of.
I think that's a fair criticism for Goonies, where Mikey just kind of decides he doesn't have asthma anymore. In Sidekicks, Mr. Lee trains him. He works on it.
That's why I said at first I didn't like it. And the doctor says it in a completely medically wrong way, that she says she looked at x-rays and you have no asthma because there's no scarring in your lungs. That's not how you do it at all. You do all these like breathing tests.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people who think they have asthma that actually don't. They just had a really bad flu and they needed albuterol for a week or two.
Interesting.
Barry, in this case, is able to find out he doesn't need these things. But I still didn't like that it's the kind of thing that the 80s movies depicts, that the weakling also has an inhaler, because it's just really not true. I knew plenty of athletic dudes, like champion athletic guys that had asthma. I mean, they just took a few pumps of their inhaler and then they could play.
Right.
Then there's a scene in this film where it's another one of his little daydream fantasies. It was one of the best depictions I've ever seen of asthma.
Okay.
And that's the scene where Barry has these chains around him. It's like a torture scene with Chuck Norris. I assume it's kind of like the very PG version of Missing in Action. There's these chains that keep being wrapped around, and it's like 8 chains through, and every time it tightens his chest. And the classic thing that children say is it feels like an elephant is sitting on your chest.
Oh.
And I could almost imagine a kid that has an asthma attack at night. I can imagine this nightmare happening, that a chain is wrapping around their chest. I thought this was actually brilliantly well done. I don't know if they meant to do it that way or they accidentally depicted asthma perfectly, but that part I want to give them kudos for. That was cool.
Fair. I do think it's worth pointing out that most of the other fantasy sequences in this movie are pretty fucking terrible. Starting with the movie's opening fantasy sequence, where it's just a dude in a mask. Then it's a little dude in the mask, and that's supposed to be Chuck Norris and Barry, Jonathan Brandis' character. It is very, very clear that Chuck Norris and Jonathan Brandis only had to show up for, I'm going to say, 10 to 15 minutes worth of filming, where they pull off the masks and then say, "Great job, Barry. Thanks. I'll do anything for you, Chuck." You know, this is your opening scene of the movie. It's supposed to be cool. You're supposed to show off the martial artistry of your star. As you said, Chuck Norris can do this stuff, but he very, very clearly didn't. And I think that's true in a lot of the movie, where it's just stunt doubles and body doubles. It ain't Chuck Norris. It ain't Jonathan Brandis. They're not even really trying to make it seem like it's them by, you see their face in a couple of close-up shots and then you only see the back of their heads or something like that. It feels really, really lazy.
This is so dumb. They're not fooling anyone.
No, they are not. The fantasies then include some pretty openly racist shit, with Joe Piscopo doing some Asian stereotypes.
Yeah, well, he's a racist asshole character. And I think Chuck Norris is absolutely insulted by everything about Joe Piscopo's character. He's the comical version of Kreese. You know, I think we can all agree that Martin Kove did a much better job as the evil sensei. I think this guy's going for comical. I don't think he's that funny.
Wait. Hold on. I'm sorry. I got to push back on this. You're saying you don't think Joe Piscopo is that funny. Allow me to rephrase that. Joe Piscopo is painfully unfunny in this movie. He is going so far over the top, and I think that's deliberate. I think that's a choice, I assume, but it's painful to watch this guy try to be funny. Nothing that he does in this movie is funny at all. I wasn't watching Saturday Night Live when Joe Piscopo was on. That was the Eddie Murphy years, the years when Dick Ebersol was running the show and not Lorne Michaels. And I think he had some characters that people liked. I think he did a Sinatra impression. Maybe he was funny on SNL. I don't think I've ever seen him in any other movies. If I have, I've completely forgotten about them. Like, he is just a stupid fucking villain. I hated every second he was on screen.
This in 1992-93, what I knew about him by then was he was kind of a little bit of a joke.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. There's nothing funny except one thing in this film I think is funny. There's a bully in this film who I think is great in this film because I think he's fantastically cast. Cellini.
It's Italian.
This guy that played Cellini, like, he looked like exactly like a 90s douchebag. But at the very end, when, Barry and the Frying Dragon team wins, Piscopo slaps Cellini on the back of the head. Jeff Piscopo was like smiling as he's doing it. I actually chuckled at that.
Okay.
It was a Three Stooges slap on the back of the head.
Okay, fine. Let's take a minute and just acknowledge that this movie also stars Danica McKellar. I forget the name of her character, and I'm not even going to bother to look it up because I'm just going to refer to her as Winnie Cooper. Have I ever told you the story of when I met Danica McKellar in real life?
No, but it's Lauren.
Okay, but I don't care. I'm going to keep calling her Winnie Cooper. When I was producing Brink, the show on Science Channel, we did a thing with Danica McKellar where she would come in and do these segments on math. She has a PhD and she writes books about math and she empowers girls and women to go into STEM, which is wonderful. And I'm not going to lie, I was excited that Danica McKellar was coming into the office and I was hoping to maybe get a picture with her, but I couldn't because our creepy fucking executive producer from the network, not the executive producer who I worked with, who is a wonderful man, but the network EP was hovering around her and wouldn't let anyone near her or talk to her or, God forbid, take a picture with her. It was just fucking creepy and weird. And I was like, producing the show, I could have had a conversation with her in a purely professional manner, and I just wasn't allowed to. I also mentioned that executive producer on our episode of The Crippled Masters. He was the same motherfucker who said that amputees are depressing to look at. So fuck that guy. But yeah, that was the time when I kind of sort of a little bit, but not really, met Danica McKellar.
Wow. One other actor I want to talk about is Mako. Probably best known for people today for his last role. He was the voice of Uncle Iroh on Avatar, the last Airbender.
Right.
But, I mean, he is a legend in the martial arts world.
He was in Conan the Barbarian, right?
Yes, he was in Conan the Barbarian.
Okay.
He was awesome. So anything he was in, I always thought it was better for him being in. I vaguely remember that this movie had similar themes in some ways and similar plot points to The Karate Kid.
Oh, yeah.
But I was surprised pleasantly how different Mr. Lee was to Mr. Miyagi.
How so?
I'll tell you one example. He tells Barry, drink this every day and twice on Sunday. He's like, oh, this is gross. And it's gross in the kind of way that you can understand medicine is supposed to smell gross. And even this mysterious medicine from Mr. Lee, this weird, gross tea he's going to have that his daughter, Noreen, Noreen, played by Julia Nixon. I thought she did a very nice job in her role, by the way.
She was great. It's not his daughter, it's his niece.
Oh, okay. And then his niece asks, what was that? And he goes, I don't know, but it won't kill him. It's a little bit of a joke, but also I saw this as this guy's actually kind of a cool guy in that he's not mystical, really Mr. Miyagi. I mean, there's a little bit of Mr. Miyagi in there, but he's not going to do any kind of magical, like clap his hands and then he's going to fix your sprained injury. That's where I think he's different. I think he knows that there's no mysticism here. He kind of has to teach a few moves, and he teaches nunchucks and brick breaking. I think that's different than Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Miyagi rules, but Mr. Lee is different.
I feel like Mr. Miyagi also had a sense of humor. I think Mako is fine in the role. I think the role is underwritten, and the movie spends too much time on the fantasy sequences and not enough time with Mr. Lee. And Mr. Lee should be training Barry into how to use his imagination to his advantage. And that's kind of sort of there a little bit in the final tournament, but it really doesn't make any sense. It doesn't land.
Yeah, you mentioned the fantasy sequences. It's one of the last ones, the one you could tell they put all the money in. It's maybe 10 minutes or something.
Is that the Candy Factory?
Yeah, the Candy Factory with clowns in it and stuff. And this is a really weird scene.
There are barrels that say MSG and smog because those are the bad things.
Right.
It's a piñata factory. I think I called it a candy factory. In that sequence, and I think one of the Vietnam ones, you do see Barry holding a gun. And I get it. It's fantasy. It's not real. And I can empathize with a kid who wants to get revenge on bullies. Sure. But the idea of a high school kid getting revenge on bullies by fantasizing about shooting people, that does not stand the test of time. And I get it. When this movie was made, school shootings were not a thing. They couldn't have foreseen that. I mean, it's a fucking nightmare that nobody could have fucking foreseen. But it feels weird seeing that today.
Absolutely not. The kids are having fantasies of saving the day from a school shooter. Everyone's still having daydreams and fantasies about this stuff.
And it's weird. It's weird. Also, the way that fantasy scene ends, Barry is doing pull-ups, and, we kind of just see him lifting his neck up, but then he just walks away after he's done doing pull-ups, and the bar is at the level of his head. So he wasn't actually doing pull-ups at all. He was just kind of moving his knees up and down, I guess. I feel like that was a mistake. I think it was supposed to look tough, and they just framed it wrong.
That was laughably bad. The only thing I did like about that fantasy was it begins with the typical thing where his mom was being kidnapped. He has to save his mom. And then it ends with like, yeah, now I'm saving a girl.
No, it's not the mom. The mom's dead. It's a teacher.
The teacher, fine. But at the end, he has to save, fine, Winnie Cooper. Lauren. All right, he's got something worth fantasizing about now, age appropriate.
I get it.
I want to talk about this actor who played the gym teacher, Richard Mole. He died a couple years ago in 2023. You and I probably best know him as the character Bull from Night Court.
Yeah.
At first this guy was kind of a two-dimensional mean gym teacher. But I actually kind of like the gym teacher. He liked the fact that Barry was trying to push through his gym class, even though, even if he was willing to sign a release for him, because ultimately, Barry does not have asthma. And even asthmatics can be in gym class, have your asthma inhaler with you. They should participate, absolutely, as long as they're, able to. When there's a little fight with Cellini, the gym teacher's like, not bad, Barry. I like that, because it wasn't even like he was a douchebag gym teacher that was like, yeah, fighting, be a man. No, that was clearly self-defense, that he knows Cellini's a bully. I give credit to that part.
Okay.
Let's get to the last part.
The tournament.
Okay. Noreen, she does fine. I think her kata is perfectly fine there.
Yeah, maybe a little sexist that's what they have the women do, is just the kata and not any real fighting?
Yes, it's interesting that this is around the time that Karate Kid Part 3 will come out, and that's a central part that that Daniel-san does. I did kata in Tiger Schulman's karate, so it's a real thing.
Sure.
So it's not weird that you do kata. It's just that the girl does kata, but like I have such a problem with that nunchuck scene because they go to like a masked ninja. That's obviously not Jonathan Brandis. So I figured they probably cast pretty boy Jonathan Brandis, and then oops, they find out later like the guy can't twirl nunchucks for shit. But here's the thing, like it's Jonathan for the first like 10 seconds or so. He's really not bad. Maybe it's me, but you don't really have to be that good at swinging around nunchucks for me to be like, holy shit, that's pretty fucking impressive.
Right.
So I think all he had to do was do that, maybe smash a board once and break it in half or something. Just cut the whole thing out or don't do it. I just hate the fact that we had to watch this mask guy for like 2.5 minutes do it.
I fully agree. I read something where they didn't want to have Barry fight his bully, Cellini, because that would have been too much of a Karate Kid ripoff at the tournament. But the whole fucking movie is a Karate Kid ripoff.
No, I think the way to get around it is to do the bricks.
I get it, but also, if you want to see the kid beat the bully, they should fight. Like, if it's a karate tournament, I think that's the way you do it in a movie.
Fair, but I can see bricks working. Mako says the greatest power you have is self-control and self-confidence. And that's kind of brick breaking. You know, brick breaking is just don't think of hitting this brick. Just put your hand through the brick. It's so much more realistic to win a brick breaking contest than any other thing. And I thought that's actually kind of a clever way to not copy Karate Kid.
Fine, but when Barry beats Cellini at the brick breaking, that's the second brick breaking that we see. In the first one, Mr. Lee beats Cellini at brick breaking, which is weird because why is the adult teacher beating the kid? That's fucking weird.
100%. Ultimately, I think the final brick breaking is fine. And I kind of like the Chuck Norris one. I think they could have done without the stupid like 1080 spin in the air of Joe Piscopo. But I like that Joe Piscopo gets a point by doing a cheap shot. Like that's the only point you're going to get on Chuck Norris.
Fine, but that fight is also really anticlimactic because there's zero tension. At no point does Joe Piscopo seem like he has any chance of winning. I mean, obviously it's a movie, you know Chuck Norris is going to win. Chuck Norris is a good guy, Piscopo is a bad guy. Fine, but there's no tension. It's just Norris beating the shit out of Piscopo. And then at the very end of the movie, when Barry is talking to Chuck Norris and then he walks away and Chuck Norris disappears, I think the point is, well, was he ever really there? Or was all of this a fantasy? Which, okay, fine, that would track with the entire rest of the movie where he was fantasizing about Chuck Norris. But if Chuck Norris wasn't there, then how did they have a fourth person to enter the tournament? Who beat Piscopo? There are a lot of questions there.
I know you could interpret it that way. I don't see the magical part. I see it as he doesn't really need Chuck Norris anymore.
So Chuck Norris was at the tournament, but maybe he wasn't really there on the bench?
He was there. I think it's more symbolic. Because also, why the fuck is Chuck Norris sitting on that bench alone? Like, after he talks to this little boy, like, what's he waiting for? But Barry had been looking at this Black Belt magazine throughout the film. The very last shot is a new kid. We're supposed to interpret now. He's going to be able to maybe see the hero that is Chuck Norris. It's a boy in a wheelchair. My first thought was it was gimmicky, but I think the theme of the movie is that really anyone can be a hero, and I kind of liked it.
One of the writers of this movie, I think, did work with kids who had disabilities. So I think that was kind of a personal thing to include a kid in a wheelchair. Okay. And I think it tracks with the idea of the movie that this kid has asthma and he can overcome it. And so then this kid in a wheelchair is going to overcome his limitations. And, you know, you can do anything that you put your mind to it. It's cliche, but whatever.
Chuck Norris's last line to Barry is, dreams do happen if you want them bad enough. That's a good thing to say. Obviously, this kid, if he's a paraplegic, he's probably not walking again.
Right. So, James, let me ask you, what do you think about Sidekicks? Do you think this movie stands the test of time?
This is my favorite Jonathan Brandis role. I think the character of Barry is kind of sweet. The love story in this, it goes where it has to go. I don't think they kiss in the film either.
Yeah, they do in the fantasy.
In the fantasy, sure. This kid Barry needed a W. I actually looked at my notes here and I said, I like this fantasy sequence, but I don't like that Barry talked at the end. And that's exactly what you referred to. You can daydream in the middle of a boring chemistry class, but you really shouldn't be like speaking out loud, like, Rambo, like me and you can save the day. Like, talk to someone if that's happening to you regularly.
That's what I was saying. He has a serious mental health condition.
I'm saying it's a mistake in the film.
But it happens.
But I'm chalking it up to non-canon. In my canon, it's non-canon.
Okay.
The fantasy sequence, the last one, oh man, that goes on too long. And I hate the nunchuck sequence. But I actually think this film's kind of sweet. I'm surprised myself. I really, really thought it was going to be fun but stupid. I do think it's fun and stupid, but it actually has the right amount of heart, and it's only like an hour and 40 minutes or something. It stands the test of time. What about you, Al? Do you think Sidekicks stand the test of time?
No, of course not. This movie is fucking terrible. I am both shocked and not shocked that you like it. It's really fucking bad. This isn't the reason that it's bad, but the fact that the bullies call Barry Wary, that's like the stupidest bully nickname ever. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, all of the fantasy sequences are awful. Early in the movie, when they're at the Frying Dragon and the biker gang shows up, I thought for sure that was a fantasy sequence, and then it turned out it wasn't. That doesn't make any sense. Very, very little of this movie makes sense. Joe Piscopo is atrociously bad. Chuck Norris isn't cool in this movie in the way that I think he's supposed to be portrayed. It looks like he couldn't care less about this movie. He's totally phoning it in. I read on the IMDb trivia that he did this movie as a favor to his brother, Aaron Norris, who directed it. And it sure seems like it was a favor that he was letting his brother know this was a favor. Just remember, Aaron, I did you this favor by appearing in this fucking movie. And he doesn't do any fighting. He doesn't do any cool martial arts stuff. And I think there are obvious flaws in the movie like that, like Piscopo, like Chuck Norris. I think something else that I noticed that really bothered me was the fact that there was just a lot of weird redundancies in here. Like, there are two mentor types in the movie. There's Mr. Lee, and then there's the imaginary Chuck Norris. And there's two love interests. It does seem like Barry has a crush on Noreen at the beginning, and then he transitions to Winnie Cooper, which makes sense. Barry has these two limitations with the asthma and the daydreaming. There are two adult nemeses, there's Piscopo and Richard Mole. Yes, to your point, Richard Mole does kind of redeem himself a little bit when he's like, oh, I just want you to fight back, Barry. But before that, he's showing up as a bad guy in Barry's fantasy sequences. The movie's doubling up on these things and not paying them off. Like if Mr. Lee said, hey, you need to focus on what I'm telling you and forget about imaginary Chuck Norris. If there was a moment where Barry realized that he needed to not have a crush on his teacher and move on to Winnie Cooper, who's age appropriate, they could have done more with it. The entire third act at the tournament is dumb and anticlimactic. The question at the end of, is Chuck Norris there or not? I think it's worth bringing up on a podcast. I also do not give a shit. This movie is lame, stupid, and totally forgettable, and it does not stand the test of time. All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we are going to be talking about Freddy Got Fingered, the Tom Green movie that is celebrating its 25th anniversary. I am looking forward to this conversation. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. Let us know your thoughts on Chuck Norris, Jonathan Brandis, Mako, martial arts, daydreaming about martial arts, daydreaming about martial arts with Chuck Norris, all of the things. We love hearing from you, and we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.